Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Eli from MOBOX Graphics, and today we are going to create this winter scene which fits the holiday spirit. As always, you can download this file together with all the previous ones on our Patreon page, but for now let's get started with the tutorial. So the first thing we are going to add is a mode text object. In here you can change the text to anything you want. I'm just going with 2019. You can set it up in any way you like, but I recommend setting the alignment to middle so it is centered to the scene. You can also play around with the other values to make it a bit more compact. Now, when you're satisfied with the thing you've written, you can go to the Caps tab. And down here you should select the Create Single Object option. That way we can add a deformer to this, like the bevel deformer, and drag it under the mode text, and it should apply to the whole object. While if we had the mode text without Create Single Object, it doesn't even apply at all because the faces at the front are separated from the rings around it. So make sure it is selected. But it is still a bit glitchy, especially at the center here of the 0 and the 9. So to fix that, we can enable the Use Angle option in the bevel deformer. And by default, it should be fixing that with the angle of 40 degrees. If it doesn't fix that for you, just play around with the value until it works. I'm going with an offset of 2 centimeters, that should be enough. And maybe we can also increase the subdivisions to something like 2 or 3 to make it a bit smoother. Also, another thing you can do is checking the limit option just to be sure nothing is going crazy. Now we can add an animation to this. You could do this with keyframes, but an easier way to do it is with the mode text object that is adding an effector, which will be the plane effector in this case. So with this selected, we just have this kind of yellow lines. But let's go to the File Off tab and change the shape to linear. Now you can see this arrow, but it is pointing towards the back. Let's rotate this so it points towards the right side. But now if we move this around, nothing is happening, because it isn't affecting the mode text just yet. That is because we need to set it up on a specific value. So in this case we have lines, words and letters. So it can apply to any of these. For this animation we want it to apply to every single number or letter in this case. So open this tab and down here you have the effects field. So drag the plane inside of it and you can see it is being applied. Now if we would move this, you can see this is the original state. And when we move the plane across the text, it is raising up. And that is not what we want. We want it to go the other way. So the easiest way to fix that is making sure you're in the plane effector under the File Off tab and just invert the fall off. So now if we move the plane effector, it is just moving them to the original state. So that looks good. Let's change the parameters to maybe 200 centimeters, so it's a bit higher. And in the video you could also see we had some rotation on this. This was on the p-value, minus 90 degrees. And that gives us this nice animation, so they drop to the floor. Okay, so that's set up. Let's create some quick keyframes to make the animation. So a keyframe at 0. And the keyframe at frame 80, where it is completed. Now if we play this animation, it is a bit slow, something we have to deal with, but it is also a bit linear in the motion. So we can add a delay effector to counter that. Under the effector tab, we can also increase this to something like 75%, so it's a bit stronger. And with that applied, the animation is also a bit longer, but it is also smoothed a bit. Okay, so we have the base animation now, but we don't have a floor where it is sticking on. So to create that, we're going to use a plane object, and we're going to make it a lot larger. Let's say we go above 1000 centimeters. Just make sure it's bigger than that. We're also going to increase the segments to something like 80 on every side. Just enough of them. So if we go in the lines mode, you can see we have a lot of polygons. We are also going to raise this up a bit, something like 10 centimeters will do. And this is because we want the letters to sink into the snow landscape. But now it's just a flat plane and not a landscape. So let's change that by adding a displacer deformer. And we're going to drag this under the plane. And under the shading tab, you can add a noise shader. And it should be fine by default, but you can also notice it's a bit rough and maybe even pointy at the vertices. So what we can do now is adding a smoothing deformer to smooth this out, of course. Let's drag this under the plane object, but you can see nothing is happening, and that is because we need the right order of deformers. So make sure the displacer is before the smoothing, and now you can see we have the smoothing taking place. Let's go into smoothing options because this is a bit strong. You can barely see any deformation anymore. And let's decrease the strength to something like 20%, for example. Okay, so that looks better. One more thing I would like to add is some collision at the points where the numbers are hitting the floor. So we have another deformer for that, which is the collision deformer. Let's also drag it under there. And now we need to set up what is colliding. So under the colliders tab, we drag in the mode text. And you can see this is already taking effect, but not in the right way. It's just a bit too big and too soft. So let's go to the advanced tab. And in here, it's just a bit of playing around with the values. It depends on your font, how big it is, how thin it is maybe. But in this case, I think you can lower most of the values. So what worked for me is just changing the size to 0 centimeters. The steps can stay the same, the stretch can be lowered all the way to just 1, and the relax can also be divided by 2, so we have only 2 of them. The stiffness is also one of the most important values on these. It shouldn't be as stiff in this case, so let's just decrease this all the way to 5%. Now it's very important to play this animation to see how this looks. So you can see this isn't exactly like we wanted to. The landscape is moving up right before the numbers are hitting the floor. So one thing we need to make sure to disable is under the object tab, which is the value of the restore shape. It is set to 100 and we need it at 0%. So let's go back to the beginning of the animation and you can notice the holes are still there, which is because we disabled the restore shape option. Now, it should be fixed if you just play it for a few seconds, pause it again and go back to the beginning. That way it's fixed. And now let's play again to see how this looks. I'm still not that convinced, so let's make some tweaks to this. I think it has to do with the delay deformer. I'm going to delete this one and make sure the plane effector was selected and apply the delay effect again. 75% maybe. Let's try again. Okay, so this was the mistake I was making. You need to add the delay effector under the letters effect as well on the mode text. So that is something you should keep in mind. If the animation is going too fast, it will not behave correctly. Okay, now let's continue. The landscape is just a gray mess right now, so let's add a material straight away. For the color, we are going to add a light gray with a hint of blue in it. And we're going to add yet another displacement on the material itself. So in here, let's add a texture, which will be another noise. Let's open the thumbnail so we can change the kind of noise down here. And let's change this to Luca, which is this one at the center. This one works just fine for snow. But it is a bit too strong right now. You can see there is a lot of dark colors going on. It should be a bit brighter because otherwise it affects too much of the displacements. So an easy way to play around with that is the low clip and the high clip down here. In this case, we just need to adjust the high clip to something close to 40. That should do. Now let's go back to the displacement options. And you should enable this sub-polygon displacement to ignore the amount of polygons on the plane. Otherwise, we just have the same effect as the displacer object we added to the plane. We don't need this many subdivisions. Let's just decrease it to 2, because the higher the number, the slower it gets to render. And also it's very strong right now. We only need a height of just 1 centimeter. And let's also set the strength to just 50%. Let's drag this on the plane and make a first render to see how this looks. And you can notice this is still a bit patchy, but it will get fixed with the lighting. So don't worry about it, we're just going to continue. Maybe we can already add a material to the text as well. This can be anything you like, but what I did on this animation is adding some kind of red color to begin with. What I also did is adding some luminance to this to make it a bit brighter. I think it looks nice in this case, but it shouldn't be at 100%, so let's just decrease it to something in the 70% range. What we're also going to do is adding some layers on this texture on the luminance channel, so we have some kind of frosted effect at the edges. So first thing we are going to add is a layer, and in here we can add an effect shader, which will be the ambient occlusion. Let's go in this one, and we are going to set this up from white at somewhere close to the beginning, so you can open this triangle here and see the position of your knobs. In this case we have white at something close to 5%, and let's set up a second one which will be black somewhere close to 20%. And we can also get rid of the last one so it stays black after that. Let's go outside of that, and we're going to add another shader, which will be the color shader. And this one should be some kind of bright red or something close to pink. And now we need to make sure we have this ambient occlusion one being set to layer mask. Let's drag this on the material and see if this works. It is not too obvious right now, maybe it will show up when we add some more lights to this. But for now it's set up and we will tweak it later if it's needed. One more thing I would like to add under the color channel is a Fresnel. Let's set this mix mode to add and just make it 10% so it's not as strong. That will do for now. Let's continue again. One more thing we can already set up is some effects, which can be an ambient occlusion in the render settings. And also let's change the renderer from standard to physical again. And under the physical options we can enable the depth of field. This way we can add a camera, and we're going to look through it. Let's set the focal length to something way bigger so it crushes the perspective a bit. So let's say 100 millimeters. We will need to zoom out, of course. I think this looks nice. Make sure you set up the focus distance to the object here. So you can do that by clicking this arrow and just clicking the object that should be in focus, which is the text, of course. Okay, so that's set up. Make sure you also go to the physical tab and decrease the f-stop. So this value is responsible for the amount of depth of field, so the amount of blur. Let's go all the way down to something like 1. Okay, so that's set up. Let's go outside of the camera view so we can move around freely again. And we're going to add the snow now. There are many ways to do this, but we're going to do it with an emitter. So let's go to Simulate, Particles, and add the emitter. We can already set up some values down here. So we're going for something like 50 on the values. It's a kind of middle ground for the snow effect, on this scale at least. And we're going to set the speed to something way slower, because snow doesn't fall that fast. So in this case, something like 10 centimeters is a nice value for that. You can also play around with the variation on the end scale. So I think 35% could be a nice number. And we should also make sure the emitter is emitting in the right direction. So now you can see we have particles right here, which means that we need to rotate this minus 90 degrees. So it points downwards. And we also need to raise this up, of course. Let's go for something close to this place. And we also want this a bit bigger because we only have snow at the 0 and 1 right now. So let's go to the emitter tab. And in here you have the values of the X and Y size. Let's set this up to something like 800 on every side. So it's a bit smaller than the landscape. That should be fine. Okay, now we want something that is being emitted, because now it's just empty particles. We will not see anything. For this scene, it was just the easiest to create some spheres, which are about 2 centimeters in radius. And we're going to create a material for this, which is just the luminance channel, which is white. That should do. Drag it on the sphere and make sure the sphere is a child of the emitter to take effect. And we're going to play the animation from the start again so we can see some of the spheres. But right now they are still random dots. So let's go to the emitter object again. And under the particle tab, we can go down here and show the objects. And also make sure you check render instances to make it a bit faster. So that works. But you can notice it is kind of slow. And when you try to pause it even, it doesn't take effect straight away if your computer is getting slow. And also if you scrub through the timeline, it is not looking like it should be. Also, if you go back to the beginning of the animation, you notice there is nothing being emitted just yet. So we only have snow at the ending of the animation, which is not what we want, of course. So what we can do is making sure the emission is starting a bit earlier. Let's go for something like -300 frames. But that still is not doing what we want because we start at frame 0 still. So we need to set our preview range to -300 as well. And make sure you extend the preview range on this scale as well. And we're going to start at the beginning again and see if this works. So that does. But now we want this to be baked, so we can still start from frame 0 on the animation and don't need to have all the calculations in front of it. So luckily this is possible if we go to the simulate menu again, and under the particles field we have bake particles. Just hit OK. And we also want the sub-objects to be included. And that should just work. So if we go back to frame 0 at the beginning, we still have this going down. Also, if you scrub through the timeline, it should work. Now, these still fall in a straight way. We want a bit more dynamics to this. So what we can do is go into the simulate menu again, and let's add a turbulence effect. In here you can play around with the values, but what worked for me is just 2 centimeters in this value. The scale can be somewhere close to 15%, and the frequency can also be 10%. So quite small values. Let's also add some gravity to this. This shouldn't be 250 centimeters, just 1 centimeter will do. So it can fall very slowly. So I think this is just what we need. Maybe we need to rebake the animation to be sure. So let's delete this tag and start at the beginning again at -300 frames again. Maybe we should have added these in before we baked it, but let's just redo it. Simulate particles, bake particles. Okay. So that works now. You can see it is taking effect like it should be. Let's continue. Maybe it's a good time to add some lighting to this. So what I'm going to add is an infinite light, like this. And we're going to rotate this in any direction you want, but I think it looks nice if we just point it a bit to the side and a bit downwards. We can adjust this on the fly, of course. Let's increase the intensity of this to 120%. The shadows can be just soft shadows. And we're also going to change the shadow to something more of a navy blue color. Right now this is still a bit harsh on the shadows, and also the lighting is a bit harsh, and the background is still black. So one more thing we can add is just an omni light, and we're going all the way down to the options and check the ambient illumination option. Let's decrease the intensity of this to just 75%, for example, and we're also going to give this a bit of color. So let's go with a very soft blue, and we're also going to add an environment to this. So let's go up here and enable the environment. The environment should be kind of the same color, something close to it at least. And we're going to increase the strength of this to 70% as well. So let's see how this looks again. Okay, so that's a bit too bright. So we need to decrease the ambient illumination on this to maybe something closer to 35 or something. Let's just look. Okay, I think that looks fine. Let's also get rid of the black background by adding a background object. And we're going to create a material for this, which will be the same color again, some kind of light blue, and just add the material to the background and see if this works. Okay, so that looks a lot better already. But we still don't have this frosted edges on here. So let's tweak this on the fly by adding the interactive render region so we can see if it is taking effect. And it is because under the luminance channel we added this ambient occlusion effect, very dependent on the position of these knobs. So let's just play around with these until we see something happening. I think I know what I did wrong, so the positions were just right. We just need to make sure you have this small option selected down here, invert direction. This is the mistake I always keep making. So now you can see the effect is kind of happening at the edges. Let's close this and disable the interactive render region so we can continue. One more thing I would like to point out about the landscape is that you can also manually modify this if you add a correction deformer to this. So drag it under there And now you can just move around the points which you want to raise these up if you want to. But I'm not going to do this for now, it's just something I would like to share with you. Now the last part I would like to add are the trees. So you could do this manually, it's not that difficult. But I found a nice way to do this. So let's get started with a cone object. And we're going to decrease the rotation segments to just 8 sides. And the height segments can be just 4 of them. Something lower at least. Let's raise this up so we can see what we're working on. And we're also going to make sure we don't have any caps on this. So disable that. This way we have this empty bottom. Let's press C to make this editable. And we're going in the point mode. Right click and select the slide tool. This way we can click and drag on these points to raise these up. So let's drag this up somewhere close to the other point. Skip one point and do it with the other one as well. And just repeat this step until you're all the way around it. Okay, so I'm done. So now we have one part of the tree, but we need more of them. So what we can do to make it easy for us is adding a cloner object and drag the cone inside of it. Let's also raise up this cloner above the scene so we can see it again. So we have the cloner set to a linear mode, which is what we want, but we want 5 pieces in this case. And we also want it to move downwards, it's a bit easier. So let's change the Y value to -50 centimeters. And we also want it to go bigger towards the bottom. So let's also increase the scale on this on every step to 120 on the X and the Z values. So that's looking a bit better already. And we also want a bit of rotation on this to add a bit of randomness. So this looks alright already, but it can be a bit more interesting in shape. So we are going to add a taper deformer and make sure it is in a new null together with the cloner object. Let's also make sure the taper deformer is the size of the tree and is also positioned together with the tree. And now we can increase the strength and decrease the curvature to get this kind of Christmas tree. So that looks nice, I think. The last thing we need is just a simple cylinder below it. Okay, so the cylinder can be any kind of brown. Let's also disable the reflectance on this. For the tree, we are just going to use a brown color, nothing too difficult. And we're also going to create this material for the leaves, which can be kind of the same effect as we did on the text. So let's go with a soft green color. And we're also going to add this Fresnel on it. It's just a small effect which looks nice. And we're also going to enable this illumination to something like 50% with the same color, which you can copy. So let's go back to the color channel, right click on this color field, and we're going to copy this, go back to luminance and paste it down here. So that should look nice. Let's drag it on top of the cloner, like this. And now, one more thing I would like to add to this are some Christmas lights. So these can just be some small spheres. Let's say just 1 centimeter or maybe 2, I'm not sure yet. We're going to add these in a cloner again. So drag the sphere in the cloner, set the mode to object so we can spread them across the tree. So the object should be this cloner here, and we're going to set the distribution to surface so it isn't as precise. You can also increase the count as you wanted to, but you should also play with the seed value so it doesn't look like it was straight away. So just find something that looks nice to you. I like this one. And we're going to add a material for these lights, of course, which is a luminance material. It can be any kind of color you want. I'm going with blue. And we're also going to increase the strength of this to something like 200%. And let's also add a glow to this, which shouldn't be this strong. So let's go with just 50% maybe, and the radius of 5 centimeters, I don't know. Let's drag it on the sphere. And now one more thing I would like to add with the same effect is a helix around this, so a spiral. So let's create this helix, and it's all the way at the floor now, so let's raise this up. It's going towards this side, so we need to set the plane of this to another direction. I think it should be XZ in this case. Let's increase the height of this. Make sure it's starting somewhere close to the bottom of the tree. And at the bottom it seems to be the right size, but at the top it's way too big. So let's decrease the end radius. We also need to make it a bit lower, like so. This should do. You can play around with this again. You can also add more loops of this if you change the end angle. Right now this is just a spline, so we need to make this an actual object. So what we can do is adding a circle spline and drag both of them in a new sweep object. Of course we need to decrease the size of this circle so it isn't as big. And we're going to make a duplicate of this material we had for the lights. And let's just change the color to something more yellow or orange. So we have a bit of contrast to this. Let's add all of this in a new group, so we just have this one tree. And we're going to move this to the floor again. And let's also scale this down a lot, of course, so it fits. What you can do now to make things easier, if you want more of these, is just having this group selected and make an instance of this. So now you can move around this instance, and if you want to change anything to this original tree, all the other ones will change along with it. So that's a bit easier for you. For example, you can also scale this down, but of course the position should still be done manually. It's a bit of tweaking, of course. So for example, I can see this is way too bright, so let's go in both of these luminance materials and decrease the strength back to just 100 maybe. And what you could also notice is that it is a bit grainy on the render. So what you can do to fix that is going to the render settings, and under the physical options we can set the sampling quality to something like medium or high, but I think medium is just enough. So if we render again, it's a bit smoother. So now it's up to you what you do with this scene. If you want some camera motion like I did on my example, it are just easy keyframes. I'm also aware this scene doesn't look as pretty as the one I did before, but as I mentioned earlier, you can download that file on our Patreon page, so you can take a look at it yourself. Anyway, I hope you learned something new again, and I will see you in the next video.